Hey y'all, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about comparing, and we're going to be using place value to compare numbers and see which ones are bigger and which ones are smaller. Here are the steps that we're going to use. The first thing we'll do is we'll line up all of our decimals. The reason why we do that is to make sure that all of the other places get lined up. You can see on these numbers over here, I've lined up their decimals, and by lining up their decimals, it puts all the ones next to each other, all of the tenths next to each other, all of the hundredths next to each other, and all of the thousandths next to each other. By lining up the decimals, I take care of all of the rest of the places. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the left to the right. That's just the same way as the way that you read, from the left to the right. And I'm going to compare each one of those places. As I compare those places, I'm going to keep these rules in mind. If there's a tie, I'm going to move on to the next place value. If one of the places is larger than the other, that number is also larger. It doesn't matter what else happens all the way to the right. As soon as I find one number that's larger or smaller than the other one, that's not a tie, then I know which number is larger or smaller. If there are no numbers when I need to get to a place, I can always add in a 0 to fill in that place value. So let's see an example. Here I've got the numbers 4.69, whose real name would be 4 and 69 hundredths. I also have the number 4.652, whose real name would be 4 and 652 thousandths. I also have the number 4.09, whose real name would be 4 and 9 hundredths. And I also have the number 4.691, and its real name would be 4 and 691 thousandths. I'm going to compare these. So the first thing I did is I went ahead and took care of step number 1. I lined up all their decimals. And you can see how all the ones lined up, all the tenths lined up, all the hundredths lined up, all the thousandths lined up. Just by worrying about the decimals, everything else took care of itself. Next, I'm going to go from left to right, comparing those numbers. There's nothing in the tens place, so I don't have to worry about it. There's nothing in the tenths place, so I don't have to worry about it. Instead, I'm going to move on to the ones place. In the ones place, I notice it's a 4 and a 4 and a 4 and a 4. Well, those are all tied. They all have the same value. Since they all have the same value, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to mark them out, and I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to move on to the next place value. In the next place value, I see the tenths place. I see a 6 and a 6 and a 0 and a 6. Because one of those numbers is different than the others, I know I can figure out which one is bigger or smaller. Since 0 is way smaller than 6, I know that this whole number, 4.09, is less than all of the other numbers, because 0 is the smallest number up there in that place value. So I'm going to write, if I was writing these in order, I would write 4.09 is the smallest. 4.09 is the smallest. It's going to be less than all of the other numbers. And I'm going to use that less than symbol. Let's try another one. So I see, okay, let's go back. I see this is the smallest number. Once I know it's the smallest number, I don't have to worry about it anymore. I can cross it all the way out. That number's done. I've already found where its location is. So I'm going to go back. The tenths, 6 and a 6 and a 6, those are all tied. Because those are all tied, I'm going to cross them out, and I'm going to move on to the next one. Now I see a 9 and a 5 and a 9. Because I see a 9 and a 5 and a 9, one of those is smaller than the others. 5 is smaller than these 9s. So I know my next number in order should be 4.652, because 5s are smaller than the 9s. So I've got 4.652. Then I don't have to worry about any of the rest of the places. I can in fact cross this one out. Now I go back to the numbers that are still left over. I see 9s. These 9s are tied, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to cross them out. Now I'm in this last place, And I notice this number has a 1 here in the thousands place, but this number has nothing there. Don't worry, I can just fill in a 0. So I'm going to fill in a 0. Since 0 is less than 1, I know this number is less than this number. So I can write 4.69 or 4.690. 4.69, and that leaves our last one, 4.691. 4.691. Okay, so now we found them in order. 4.09 is less than 4.652, which is less than 4.69, which is less than 4.691. We put them in order by following these rules. We lined up the decimals, then we went from left to right, and as we went from left to right, we followed these rules. If they were tied, we crossed it out and moved on to the next place. If one of the places is larger, we know that number is larger. If one of the places is smaller, we know that number is smaller. If no number in a place value is there to be compared, we add in a 0. So that way we can always break a tie. All right, let's look at some examples. So, this one I'm going to do with you, and I want you to do this one by yourselves. So on this one, first thing I did was step number 1, I lined up the decimals. I've got 15.2, I've got 1.2, I've got 15.19, and I've got 5.6. If I want to know what order these go in, if I want to put them from smallest to greatest or least to greatest, I'm going to follow my steps. First, I'm going to go from the left. I see a 1 and this is an empty space, so I'm going to fill in a 0, and a 0. 1, 0, 1, 0. Okay, so I know these zeros are less than the 1s. So that means I'm going to focus for right now just on the 1.2 and the 5.6 to figure out which one of these is smaller. So I'm going to go to the next part. It's not this, it's not this. 1 is less than the 5. Since 1 is less than the 5, I know that my smallest number is this one right here, 1.2. Next, I've got this number because it had a 0 in the tens place and the other ones have 1s in the tens place. So my next number would be 5.6. And again, as soon as I figure out where it goes, I can cross it out. Then I look at these two. They both have a 1 in the tens place. They both have a 5 in the ones place. This one has a 2 in the tenths place, and this one has a 1 in the tenths place. Since 2 is greater than 1, I know that 15.2 is the largest, and 15.19 is the next one that should happen for us. 15.19 is smaller than 15.2. Notice how this one looks like a 2 and this one looks like a 19. And you might get confused and say, 2, that seems like it should be smaller than 19. But if I fill in the 0 and I compare decimal 2.0 versus decimal 1.9, then it becomes a lot more obvious about what happened. 20 hundredths is more than 19 hundredths. So the order that we put these in is 1.2 is less than 5.6, which is less than 15.19, which is less than 15.2. That's the order that we did these in. Okay? While I erase the board, I want you to go ahead and set this one up. First thing I want you to do is I want you to set this one over here up. Go ahead and pause the video while you set that one up. Okay, now that you've set it up, you remember that our first step is to line up those decimals. So I'm going to line up those decimals. I've got decimal 2, 4. I've got decimal 3. I've got 1.2. And I've got decimal 2, 4, 1. You might notice that I chose not to write these zeros in the ones place down. That's okay. If that's how you like to write it, that's okay. If you instead like to write those in, this is also okay. However you'd like to write it, whatever works best for you. When I look at these ones, I'm going to follow my rules now. So go ahead and follow your rules. Now that you've got it set up, follow your rules and see if you can put them in order from least to greatest. Which one of these is the smallest? Which one of these is the largest? See if you can follow your rules. Pause the video and sort them. Okay, so rule number 1 is to look at them from left to right. 0, 0, 1, 0. 1 is the largest, so I know that this number has to be the last number that we come up with. So I'm going to cross it out, and I'm going to say this is our last number that we come up with, 1.2. Then I'm going to go back to my numbers. I'm going to try to break the ties again. 0, 0, 0. Those are all tied. So I'll cross them out, and I'll go on to the next part. 2s and a 3 and a 2. Well, 3 is bigger than those 2s. So I'm going to put this one next. Decimal 3. That was bigger than all of the others. Now I'm going to cross this one out. Then I'm going to look at the last 2 that are left. The 2s are tied. Since the 2s are tied, I'm going to cross those ones out. And I'm going to move on to the next step. The 4s, wait a second, the 4s are also tied. So I'm going to cross those ones out. Lastly, I want to compare the thousands place. This 1 versus there's nothing up there. So I'm going to fill in a 0. Because 0 is less than 1, I know this is the smallest number and this is a bigger number. So I'm going to write in my bigger number, and then at the very beginning I'm going to write in my smallest number. So now I can write this as decimal 240, 240 thousandths. Or if I wanted to, I could actually just leave this back at decimal 24. Now I've been able to compare these decimals. First thing I did was I lined them up. Then I went left to right, comparing them. If there was a tie, I skipped it and moved on. If one of them was larger than the other, I knew where it went, whether it was smaller or greater. Okay, I hope this helped you out, and I hope to see you again soon.